I never imagined my life would change the way it did that evening. As a mother, I had always poured everything I had into raising my son, sacrificing my own needs to make sure he had what he needed. I wasn't rich, but I made sure he was. That evening, I was prepared to surprise him and his wife with something meaningful, a $40,000 check, all the money I had saved over 3 years, to help them with a down payment on their first home. I knew it wasn't much compared to what some could give, but it was everything I could offer. Then my son said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Mom, you're not as good as my stepmom. She buys us better gifts. She takes us on nicer trips. I just think you should know that." The words cut through me like a knife. I had given everything for him, from putting food on the table to showing up at every game, every birthday. And now my son, my own flesh and blood, was telling me I wasn't good enough because I didn't have the same money as his stepmom. I looked at him, trying to process the weight of his words. The dinner, the gestures, the years of sacrifice. It all felt like it meant nothing. And then something inside me snapped. I pulled the check from my pocket, placed it on the table, and tore it up piece by piece. No anger, no dramatic outburst, just calm. It was my money, my choice, and in that moment, I knew I had to make him see. Sometimes love isn't measured in how much you can spend. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life, I've been a mother. I worked as an accountant, a steady job that paid the bills, but never left much room for luxuries. My child and I never had much money, but we made do. When my child was 7, my ex-spouse and I divorced. The court gave my ex-spouse primary custody, and I got my weekends and holidays. I paid child support religiously, even though I didn't make much, and did whatever I could to support my child. I drove a beat-up truck, lived in a small one-bedroom apartment, and worked long hours. But I never complained. My child was my world. I made sacrifices that I never regretted. I spent money on my child's needs, on their school supplies, their clothes, and their extracurricular activities. I didn't have much to give, but I always made sure that I was there for them, even if I had to go without things I needed. I didn't mind. They were growing up, and I wanted to make sure that they had every opportunity to succeed. My ex-spouse remarried when my child was 10. My ex-spouse's new partner, the stepmother, had a different life. She came from a wealthier background, and it didn't take long for my child to start noticing the differences. At first, I was happy for my child. They were going to experience a more comfortable lifestyle, one that I couldn't afford to give them. I told myself it was fine. After all, I was happy that they would have a life with more opportunities, even if I wasn't the one providing the luxury. However, over time, I noticed subtle shifts. While I was still working long hours and scraping by, the stepmother would take my child on vacations to places I couldn't afford. She would buy them things that I couldn't, and while I never resented them for it, a part of me couldn't help but feel left behind. At first, it was just the occasional trip or expensive gift, things I couldn't possibly match. But as my child got older, I could feel a subtle change in how they valued the things I did for them. It wasn't just about the gifts or the money. It was how they started comparing everything. The stepmother's car was nicer than mine, and she could afford to take them places I could only dream of. When I tried to plan something special, like a camping trip, I could see the disappointment in their eyes. "Why can't we go to the beach like Mom and her family do?" they would ask, and it stung every time. I understood that they were just a kid, but slowly it seemed like they began to view our time together as less important. I never made them feel guilty for it. I didn't want them to feel responsible for my financial struggles, but I couldn't deny that it hurt. I spent years making sure they had the things they needed, even if it meant sacrificing my own comfort. Yet, it seemed that all my efforts were overshadowed by the life the stepmother could provide for them. It wasn't just about the material things anymore. The distance between us started to grow. My child started turning to the stepmother for advice, for guidance, instead of me. She became the one they relied on for emotional support, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being pushed aside. It wasn't her fault, but it didn't make it any easier. I continued to give what I could, but with every passing year, I felt more invisible to them. They had the stepmother to provide them with the things I couldn't, and soon it felt like I was losing my place in their life. Over the years, I began to notice small but telling signs that things were shifting in my relationship with my child. It wasn't sudden, but rather a gradual change that crept up on me. At first, I thought it was just a phase, something that would pass as my child grew older. But the more I saw it, the more it became impossible to ignore. The comparisons started to intensify. I was used to hearing about the things the stepmother could provide, but it was starting to feel like those comparisons weren't just about the gifts or experiences anymore. They were about the kind of mother I was. "Mom, why don't we ever go on those kinds of vacations?" my child would ask, after hearing stories from the stepmother's trips. "Why don't you have a nicer car like Mom does?" The comments became more frequent and more pointed. It wasn't just a matter of luxury. It felt like my child was comparing me to someone who could offer everything I couldn't. I kept telling myself it wasn't personal. I was doing my best, after all. But it became harder to ignore the emotional distance growing between us. The love I had always shown, the sacrifices I had made, seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the life the stepmother could provide. She could afford to take them places I had only dreamed of. She could buy them things I could never afford, and I could feel my child slowly drifting away from me. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe it was just an adjustment period. Maybe they were just figuring out their place in the new family dynamic. But as time went on, I began to realize that my child wasn't just drifting away. They were choosing a new loyalty. The emotional support I had always provided wasn't enough anymore. The stepmother was the one my child turned to for advice, for comfort, for guidance. It hurt. It hurt deeply. I had been the one who was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every moment of triumph and failure. I had been the one who worked long hours to make sure my child had everything they needed, even when it meant sacrificing my own comfort. Yet it seemed like that didn't matter anymore. The money, the vacations, the material things, it was all that seemed to matter now. I couldn't help but wonder, where did I fit into all of this? I had spent so many years thinking that the love I gave would be enough. But now it felt like I was being pushed aside. My child had their stepmother for all the things I couldn't provide. Emotional support, material wealth, the kind of life I couldn't afford to give them. It felt like I had become invisible in their eyes, as if the years of love and sacrifice I had poured into them no longer mattered. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the comparisons weren't just coming from my child. They were coming from their stepmother too. She had subtly, or maybe not so subtly, made it clear that she saw herself as the better parent, the one who could provide the things I couldn't. I didn't blame her. She had her own way of showing love, but it didn't make it any easier for me to accept. The distance between my child and me grew. I started to feel like I was fighting a losing battle, like I couldn't compete with a life I would never be able to give them. And that was the hardest part of all. Realizing that no matter how much I love my child, no matter how much I sacrifice for them, it wasn't enough. They had someone else who could give them more, and in their eyes that was what mattered most. It all came to a head one evening when my child and their partner invited me over for dinner. They said they wanted to discuss something important, and while I didn't expect much, I could tell by the tone of their message that it was something serious. I figured maybe they had news about buying a house, or perhaps were considering moving to a new place. I'd been saving money for months, cutting back on little expenses and working overtime when I could. I had put aside $40,000, hoping to help them with a down payment on a home. I knew they had been struggling to save, and I wanted to make a meaningful contribution to their future. Dinner started off like any other. We ate, exchanged small talk, and discussed trivial things, the weather, work, and everyday life. The atmosphere seemed normal, but I could sense something was off. It wasn't until my child finally brought up the matter that the tension became palpable. "We've been talking to Mom about the house," my child said, looking at their partner for reassurance. "She's been offering some help with the down payment and has some plans to help us with financial advice. We've been thinking it over." They paused, and I could see that my child was hesitating, unsure of how to proceed. "Mom," I asked, already knowing where this was headed. My child's stepmother had always been involved in the financial side of their life, offering support in ways I couldn't, but I never thought it would go this far. "Well, yeah," my child continued, finally looking at me. "She's been really supportive. She has more resources than you, and she's offered to help with the down payment if we need it. We were hoping she could help us fix our credit too." I sat there, quiet for a moment, processing the words. This wasn't the first time I had heard about how much their stepmother was helping, but something about the way my child phrased it this time felt different. It wasn't just a casual mention. It was as though they were seeking approval, but from whom? their stepmother or me. My mind raced, but I forced myself to remain calm, not wanting to escalate things. I see, I said, nodding slowly. The disappointment settled in my chest, but I didn't allow it to show. And what do you think about that? I asked, looking at my child. It's just, well, Mom, we're being honest here. We don't want you to feel bad or anything, but, well, you're not as good as her when it comes to stuff like this. She has the resources. She can do more for us. The words hit me like a wave. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I had always tried to do my best, even when I didn't have the means to give them what they wanted. And now, hearing those words, hearing that my child thought I wasn't as good because I couldn't provide the same financial support, was a gut punch I wasn't prepared for. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. I've been doing my best with what I have, I said, fighting to keep my composure. But if you think she's doing more for you than I can, then maybe I'm just wasting my time trying. My child stared at me, confusion on their face, unsure of what I meant. No, Mom, that's not what I meant, they stammered. I just wanted to make sure you weren't hurt by it. We didn't mean it like that. But I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They were apologizing, but they weren't truly understanding the gravity of what they'd just said. I stood up from the table, my hands trembling slightly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the check for $40,000, and placed it on the table between us. My child's eyes widened. What is that? They asked, their voice cracking slightly. This, I said, my voice cold, was going to be your house down payment, $40,000. I've been saving it for months, cutting back on everything I could to help you. But if you think I'm not good enough because I can't offer the same things your stepmother can, then this is where it ends. My child reached out to grab the check, their fingers brushing against it, but I quickly snatched it back. No, I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. You're right, I'm not as good as your stepmother. So why don't you ask her for the down payment instead? The words were out before I could stop them. I could see my child's face shift from shock to something I couldn't quite place. Their partner, silent up until now, looked at me with a mixture of surprise and guilt, but there was no turning back. I tore the check into pieces one by one until it was a pile of confetti on the table. No anger, no outburst, just a final moment of clarity. My child sat frozen, speechless, while their partner looked on, stunned. Mom, wait, my child whispered, standing up. I didn't mean... No, I interrupted, cutting them off. You meant exactly what you said. And now you'll live with it. Without another word, I walked out, leaving them behind. My phone buzzed as I drove home, but I didn't answer. Not yet. The drive home was the longest I've had in years. I didn't listen to the radio, didn't look at my phone, didn't focus on anything other than the road ahead. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The emotional weight of what had just happened was too heavy. I wasn't sure how to process it, how to deal with the hurt that was settling deep inside me. I didn't feel angry. Not at first. I just felt numb. The reality of what had just happened, what had just been said, was overwhelming. But as I got closer to home, the anger began to bubble up inside me. How could they think that way? How could my child, after everything I had sacrificed, see me as less than someone who could offer them luxury and material things? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake, a slip of the tongue. Maybe they didn't mean it the way it came out. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My child had chosen sides. They had chosen the side of convenience, the side of financial support, over the side of real love and sacrifice. And it hurt more than I could ever put into words. When I walked into my apartment, I felt the emptiness of it all, the silence that echoed after the storm, the quietness of being alone with my thoughts, with the overwhelming feeling of rejection, was deafening. I stood there for a long moment, looking around at the simple furniture, the modest surroundings, the life I had built with so little. But it was still mine. It was everything I had, everything I could offer, and yet it wasn't enough. The phone started buzzing before I even had a chance to take my shoes off. First, it was a message from my child. Please call me, it said, followed by another text. This is my fault. I didn't mean what I said. But I didn't feel like responding. I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out how to process all of this. Then the calls started. The first one was from my ex-spouse. They had heard what happened, and their voice, even over the phone, was full of concern. What did you do? they asked, their tone sharp. Do you know how upset they are? You've made this worse than it needed to be. I was silent for a moment. You don't understand, I said, finally speaking. It's not about the money. It's about how they see me. It's about how they value me. They didn't mean it like that, my ex insisted. They're just frustrated. You know how they are. But I couldn't agree. I knew what had been said, and I knew it wasn't just a slip. This was how my child felt, and deep down, I knew it was the truth. I had been second place for so long, but now it felt like I was invisible. I wasn't even worth the effort to care for anymore. I'm done, I finally said. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that my love and sacrifices are enough when they don't even see them anymore. I'm not just going to give them what they want because I'm expected to. Don't make any rash decisions, my ex pleaded. But it was too late. My mind was already made up. This wasn't about a down payment or a house. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And right now, I needed to set them, no matter how painful it would be. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was from my child. I saw the message on the screen, but didn't open it right away. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The words they had spoken kept echoing in my mind, and no amount of apologizing would take away the sting. I sat down on the couch, staring at the phone in my hand. I had been their mother for so long, had given them everything I had, and this was how they saw me. It was hard to swallow, but I had to accept it. I had to accept that I wasn't the parent they wanted anymore, but I wasn't going to let them guilt me into feeling like I owed them something more. I had done my best. I had given all that I could, and now it was time for me to take a step back and see what happened next. The next few days were a blur of emotions, phone calls, and messages I wasn't ready to answer. I tried to keep my distance, but it seemed that no matter how much I shut myself off, the fallout from the dinner was still inescapable. Every time I looked at my phone, there was a new text, a new call, a new plea from my child, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't sure I could handle another conversation where they pretended to understand what I was feeling. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to get involved. My ex-spouse, who had always been somewhat distant after the divorce, suddenly became very vocal. Calls came pouring in from my ex, each one more urgent than the last. You need to fix this, they said. You can't just leave it like this. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't about fixing things with a phone call or an apology. It wasn't about offering more than I could give just to make things better. It was about what had been said and how deeply it had cut into me. Then my ex-new spouse, the stepmother, got involved too. At first it was subtle, a message from my ex asking if I could come to a family dinner and discuss things. I knew it was coming. I knew that they would want to have a conversation, to smooth things over, to resolve the conflict. But I wasn't ready to pretend that everything was fine. I wasn't ready to sit at a table and act as if the words my child had said hadn't shattered me. I was sitting on my couch one evening, contemplating everything that had happened, when my phone rang. It was my ex. I hesitated, knowing what was coming. The calm, calculated voice on the other end made me tense. We need to talk, my ex said. This has gone too far. No, I replied, my voice steady but firm. It's gone exactly where it needed to go. You're not thinking clearly, my ex shot back. You're hurting them. They didn't mean what they said. It was just a moment of frustration. Frustration? I asked, the sting of the words still fresh. They were speaking the truth. They don't need me anymore. They have everything they want, and it's not about love or sacrifice anymore. It's about who can provide the most, and that's not me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. It's not that simple, my ex finally said. They just don't understand. No, I said, my voice trembling with the force of my emotions. They understand perfectly. They just don't care. After that call, I didn't hear from my ex for a while, but the messages kept coming. My child sent a string of texts, some apologizing, some trying to justify their actions. I didn't mean to hurt you, one said. It's just that we've been struggling, and Mom can help us in ways you can't. Another one came later. Please, can we talk? I don't want things to be like this. But I couldn't respond. What was there to say? They had already made it clear how they saw me, how they saw my value. I wasn't worth more than what I could provide. Then, a few days later, my ex contacted me again, this time with a suggestion that I should come to a family dinner. They said it would be a chance for everyone to clear the air. They said it wasn't just for my child's sake, but for the whole family. It's time to put this behind us, my ex urged. You've been holding on to this too long. I knew what was coming next. My ex wanted me to apologize. to make things right. They didn't see the point I was trying to make. They didn't see how deeply I had been hurt. They didn't understand that this wasn't just about a moment of anger or frustration. It was about a fundamental shift in how my child saw me. No matter how much I loved them, it wasn't enough. They were no longer interested in the love I could give. They were looking for someone who could give them everything else. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to sit there pretending that I could just forgive and forget. But I knew that refusing would only escalate things further. So, with a heavy heart, I agreed. The dinner was set for the following weekend. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My child was already sitting at the table with their partner, their faces a mix of uncertainty and guilt. The stepmother was there too, watching me closely, her eyes calculating, assessing how I would react. I could feel the weight of the unspoken judgment in the room. My ex was the first to speak, offering me a polite but strained smile. "Thank you for coming," they said. "We need to talk, to work through this." I nodded, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, fighting the urge to walk out the door and never look back. But I knew I couldn't. As much as I wanted to, I had to face this. I had to make them see that I wasn't just some placeholder in their life, there to serve a financial role. I was their mother, and that meant something, whether they understood it or not. The conversation went in circles. My child apologized, but it didn't feel real. The stepmother chimed in, saying it was just a misunderstanding, that my child didn't mean to cause me pain. But I wasn't buying it. The damage had already been done, and the more I sat there, the more I realized that nothing would ever be the same. My place in their life had shifted, and no amount of talking or apologies would change that. The days after the family dinner felt like a blur of tension, silence, and unresolved emotions. I went through the motions, but I wasn't really living. Every conversation felt empty, every phone call strained. I had agreed to attend that dinner, to try to patch things up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had only made everything worse. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear to me that nothing would ever be the same. I had been replaced not by someone who could love my child as I did, but by someone who could offer a life I could never afford. And that realization cut deeper than anything I had experienced. It wasn't just the hurt from my child's words. It wasn't just the coldness from the stepmother or the discomfort of sitting at that table pretending that everything was fine. It was the overwhelming sense of loss, the loss of something that had always been mine, something I thought I could never lose. My role as a mother had always been my anchor, my reason for everything. I had given everything for my child, sacrificing my own dreams, my own needs, and my own happiness. I had built my life around them, and now it felt like none of that mattered anymore. It was late one night when the full weight of it hit me. I was sitting alone in my apartment, the silence around me deafening, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything felt magnified. I had just finished reading another message from my child, another apology, another plea to talk. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that things were fine, that this was just a bump in the road. I stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, a world that felt so far away from me. I couldn't help but think about everything I had done for my child, everything I had given up to make sure they were happy. And yet, it had never been enough. It was like I had spent all these years building something that was fragile, something that could be torn down with just a few words. I took a deep breath and sat back down on the couch. The tears came then, quietly at first, then in a rush. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't frustrated. I was just broken. The pain of knowing that I was no longer needed, that the love I had given didn't count for anything anymore, was too much to bear. For a long time, I had believed that love and sacrifice were enough. But now I saw the truth. Love wasn't enough when it couldn't be measured in what you could give. I looked around my apartment at the simple life I had built. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I realized then that this was all I could offer, everything I had. My child would never see that. They would never understand that it wasn't the money, the vacations, or the luxury that mattered. It was the time, the care, the effort. And now I had to accept that they didn't see that. They had their stepmother, and their stepmother could give them what I couldn't. But in that moment, I also realized something else. I had spent so much of my life giving, sacrificing, and loving without asking for anything in return. And maybe that's what I had done wrong. I had given without setting any boundaries, without realizing that love didn't mean losing myself in the process. It didn't mean letting someone else define my worth. It didn't mean letting them take everything and leave me with nothing. I was still crying, my face buried in my hands, when my phone rang. It was from my ex-spouse again, a voice on the other end pleading for me to reconsider, to make things right. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be told that everything would be okay, that I needed to forgive and forget. I had done my part. I had shown up for years, and now it was time to let go. It was time to let go of the fantasy that I could fix everything, that I could make it right. The next morning, I made a decision. I would stop trying. I would stop chasing after someone who had already moved on, someone who had already made their choice. I would stop trying to be the person they wanted me to be and start focusing on who I was. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the past. The pain would still be there, but I would find a way to live with it. It wasn't about winning back their love, it was about finding my own way forward. And that, I realized, was the hardest thing I would ever have to do. A few days passed, and the silence between me and my child stretched out like a chasm I wasn't sure could ever be crossed. My phone stayed quiet, save for a few scattered messages from my ex, trying to convince me to reconsider, to talk to my child, but I couldn't find the words to respond. How could I explain the rawness I felt, the betrayal that had sunk so deep within me? How could I make them see the hurt without sounding like I was just playing the victim? It was during those quiet days that I realized something I hadn't fully understood until then. My entire life had been centered around my child, around giving everything I had to them. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the process. I had become so wrapped up in trying to prove my worth through sacrifice, through giving, that I had forgotten to hold on to my own sense of value. I had always thought that love and sacrifice were enough, but now I saw that they were not always the things that were truly valued. I had given them all the love I had, and yet it was never enough. I had to ask myself, how much more could I give? How much more would I have to lose before I realized that my worth wasn't defined by what I could do for others? It was something I had to come to terms with on my own, without seeking validation from anyone else. It was a late afternoon when the clarity finally hit me. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall, when my phone buzzed once again. It was from my child. My hand hesitated before picking it up. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to read it. The message was simple but unexpected. Can we meet? I want to talk. No apologies, just talk. I read the words several times, each one sinking in deeper than the last. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to justify anything. It was just a request to talk, to finally hear what I had been feeling all along. It was the opening I needed, the one I had been waiting for, and I knew that this time I couldn't ignore it. I agreed to meet, choosing a small cafe on the outskirts of town, somewhere neutral, somewhere quiet. I needed a place where I could speak freely, without any pressure, without the weight of expectations. I arrived early, sat at a corner table, and waited. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Would this be the moment where everything finally came out? Would we both finally hear each other, truly listen? When my child arrived, they looked tired. Their eyes were red, like they hadn't slept in days. They sat down across from me, not saying anything at first. We just stared at each other for a moment, the silence hanging between us like a wall that neither of us knew how to tear down. Finally, they spoke. I know I've hurt you. I know that the things I said can't be taken back, but I need you to know that I never meant to make you feel less than. I didn't mean to make you feel like you were second to anyone. I was just confused. And I let the things around me influence how I saw everything. I looked at them, trying to process what they were saying. You don't get to decide what I feel, I said quietly, my voice steady but firm. What you said, it hurt. And it's not just about the money, the gifts. It's about how you saw me. It's about how you saw the things I did for you, the love I gave you. All those years of sacrifices, and suddenly, I wasn't enough. They nodded, their face a mix of regret and sorrow. I see that now. I've been so caught up in wanting things, in wanting a life that seemed easier, that I didn't realize what was right in front of me, what you did for me, what you've always done. It's worth more than any gift, any vacation. I was just too blind to see it. I thought I needed more, but I already had everything that mattered. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything finally starting to shift. It wasn't an easy conversation. It wasn't a perfect conversation. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were truly seeing each other again, not through the lens of material things, but through the lens of love and understanding. I'm not perfect, I said, my voice softer now, and I'm not asking you to be, but I need you to understand something. Love isn't about what you can buy or how much you can give. It's about being there for each other. It's about the moments that matter, the memories we create, the sacrifices we make for one another. My child looked at me, their eyes filled with emotion. I understand that now. I want to rebuild, to make it right. I want us to be okay again. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could be. It wouldn't be easy, but we could start again. We could rebuild, not from the ground up, but from the foundation of love that had always been there, even when it was hard to see. I smiled softly, nodding. We'll start where we need to, together. The conversation with my child had been a turning point, but it didn't mean that everything was suddenly fixed. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies or heartfelt words could erase the hurt that had been caused. It wasn't just about what had been said in that moment. It was the years of silent neglect, of feeling invisible. I had given so much of myself, sacrificed so much for them, and in return, it felt like I had been pushed aside for someone else's wealth, someone else's ability to provide what I couldn't. When I left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I didn't know what the future would look like for me and my child. I didn't know if things would ever go back to how they were, if we would ever be able to fully rebuild what had been broken. But I knew one thing for certain. I had taken the first step toward healing, for both of us. It wouldn't be easy, and it would take time, but we could start again, one piece at a time. The weeks that followed were filled with awkwardness. My child would reach out occasionally, sending messages, asking if I was okay. But I wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive them. I did, more than anything. But forgiveness didn't come easily. I couldn't just sweep everything under the rug. I needed time, and I needed to make sure that they truly understood the weight of what had happened. The worst part of all of this, though, was the fallout with the rest of the family. My ex-spouse, of course, had his own opinion on the matter. He wasn't pleased with how I had handled things, how I had torn up the check. You should have just talked about it, worked through it, he'd said. You've made things so much worse. But what my ex didn't understand was that I wasn't just dealing with money. It wasn't about the $40,000 check I had tried to give them. It was about the years of emotional investment, the feeling that I had been replaced in my child's life. I wasn't angry that they had chosen the stepmother's financial support over mine. What hurt was the underlying message that my love, my sacrifices, didn't hold the same weight as the material things the stepmother could offer. The real twist came when I found out how my child and their partner had handled the situation after the fallout. It started innocently enough with a casual phone call from my ex. I talked to them, my ex said. They said they felt guilty about what happened, but they also said something interesting. I braced myself, knowing I didn't want to hear what came next. What did they say? I asked, already preparing myself for disappointment. They said you didn't really have the right to be upset, my ex continued, that you were punishing them over something trivial, that you could have helped without making it about your pride, that you could have just offered the money and not made it about anything else. I was stunned. They said that? Yes, my ex replied, and they said they didn't understand why you were being so dramatic about it. It's just money. It's not like it was a betrayal. I felt the anger welling up inside me, but I fought to keep it under control. It's not just about the money. It's about how they see me. It's about how I've been treated like I'm not enough. I didn't just give them money. I gave them my life, and it wasn't enough. My ex didn't respond right away. There was a long pause before they spoke again. I don't know what to say, but they still don't get it. They still think it's about the money. The words stung, but I wasn't surprised. In the end, my child's relationship with their stepmother seemed to define everything, including how they viewed me. I was a part of their life, yes, but I was now secondary to the life that their stepmother had created for them. And as much as I wanted to fix things, as much as I wanted things to go back to how they were, I realized that I couldn't. I couldn't keep fighting for a place in their life that I had already given everything for. A few days later, I received a message from my child. It was brief and to the point. I'm sorry, we've talked. I don't want to lose you. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing. Did I respond? Did I let them back in after everything that had happened? Did I accept that this was the new reality of our relationship? I wasn't sure. What I did know was that I had to protect myself. I had to stop expecting more from them than I was getting, and I had to stop giving so much of myself to someone who couldn't see the value of what I offered. I sat there for a long time, the message still open on my phone, and then, after what felt like an eternity, I typed my response. I love you, but I can't keep pretending that things haven't changed. I need time to heal, and I need you to understand that love isn't just about what we can give each other, it's about respect. I hope one day you'll see that. I pressed send, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I had finally set the boundaries I needed to protect my own heart. Weeks passed, and the silence between me and my child became a heavy weight, but it wasn't as unbearable as it once had been. I had spent so many years trying to fix everything, trying to prove my worth, but now I understood that I had to stop. I had given all I could, and yet it still wasn't enough. The hardest part was accepting that. I spent time focusing on myself, on the life I had built for me. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I took up hobbies I had neglected, spent more time with friends who valued me, and began to reconnect with the parts of myself I had lost in my endless pursuit of proving my love. I began to realize that I didn't need anyone's validation to know my worth. My sacrifices had been meaningful, but I didn't have to be defined by them. One day, out of the blue, my child called. It was the first real conversation we had since everything fell apart. The apology wasn't immediate. They started by telling me about their life, about their new plans, the ups and downs. It was a conversation, not a negotiation, and for the first time, it felt like we were talking as equals, without the weight of past mistakes pressing down on us. I know I hurt you, my child said, and this time I heard the sincerity in their voice. And I see now how much you've done for me. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. I didn't understand what you gave me until it was almost too late. It wasn't an easy apology to accept, but it was a start. Slowly, with time, I began to rebuild my relationship with my child. It wasn't the same as it was before, but it was real. It was honest. It was no longer about expectations or material things. It was about understanding and respect. I learned a powerful lesson during this time. Love doesn't need to be proven through grand gestures or sacrifices. Sometimes it's the small things, the quiet moments, the respect for each other's boundaries that matter the most. I also learned that I couldn't give everything to someone else at the cost of losing myself. I had to learn to value my own worth and stop giving so much of myself to others without receiving the same in return. In the end, my relationship with my child was never the same as it had been. But it didn't have to be. It was healthier, stronger in ways it had never been before, and that, I realized, was enough.